this is Tom Metzger, your host for Race and Reason again, that longest-running show of its type on cable access TV. Seen around the country on many local cable access systems, and those cable access systems serve many times 3, 4, sometimes 5 towns and cities. And we're dedicated, of course, to freedom of speech, true freedom of speech, which upsets some of our opposition. We feel we're an island of free speech in a sea of controlled and managed news, and if you don't think news and so forth is controlled, only 26 corporations control all the media in the United States. So today we have a very interesting guest who's been on the show before. His name is Nikolas Schreck, and he has a musical group and organization called Radio Werewolf that he terms a musical terrorist organization, and he's also a revisionist writer who has written a book called The Study of Charles Manson. Nice to have you here.
Always a pleasure
Nikolas.
to be here, Tom. How are you?
What's been happening to Nikolas Schreck since the last time we met?
Well, we're entering phase 2 of Radio Werewolf's operation for world dominion, and what we're waging is a cultural war right now on every front, in music, in literature, utilizing the media against itself. What we're trying to do is bring back a resurgence of the Western European tradition that has been all but lost in the world. And we're using music because that's the instrument that young people respond to right now. We're doing propaganda directly to awaken the wolf in man, because the wolf is a symbol of Western European power and fury, and that's why we use the werewolf imagery.
Now you have used what you had termed neo-Gothic music in the past.
Well, Gothic, of course, is a Germanic tribe, and there's a spirit to the Western people that is unique in the world, and it is a Gothic spirit, and I think that's the purest form of Western culture, and I think we keep that flame alive in Radio Werewolf.
I understand you're talking about the evolution of this, that your music is getting more into the political...
Well, I wouldn't say political, because we transcend politics. Politics is merely the puppet show of human beings, and we transcend that, but we are interested in the control of human beings for our own purposes.
You have a symbol on your left arm here. Could you sort of scoot over? What is this?
This is the 13th rune in the ancient runic alphabet of the Norse people, and it represents Yggdrasil, the tree of life, and this is the meeting point between life and death.
Is that the tree that Odin was supposed to have been crucified on?
Exactly, and it's the tree that symbolically supports the universe. And the wolf's angle symbol we use as the symbol for the Abraxas Foundation, which is sort of a Thule society for the 90s. In the words of my collaborator Boyd Rice, it's a fascist occult think tank. And what we're doing is coming up with new strategies and techniques to bring this cultural renaissance into the future, into the 90s.
I notice you have a wolf's ring on your finger there.
Well, as I've explained, the wolf has always been a particularly Western European image, and the wolf represents the beast in man. That's what we seek to unleash in humanity, because it's been repressed and tamed by Judeo-Christian values, and that above all is what we seek to eradicate. The wolf should be unleashed. We can hearken back to Norse mythology where Fenris, the ancient wolf god, was unleashed upon the world, and the Götterdämmerung occurred, the Ragnarok, the end of the world. And symbolically, that is what we are undergoing right now in history, an end of the old order, an end of the old world, and the beginning of a new order.
The end of the economic determinist idea and moving towards race and culture.
Of every idea, of every traditional idea of the past. In my opinion, we're living in a dead world. All the traditions of the past are decadent, dead, corrupt, and anyone who continues to cling to them are like maggots clinging to a corpse.
So the music today, you would see it as...
Music of today is absolute swill. It's designed to keep young people passive, restrained, and it's designed to tame them and keep them into sort of domestic sheep I would separate young people today into two breeds. There's predators, which are the wolves, and there are the sheep, and that's most of them. And we appeal to an elite. We are, frankly, an elitist organization. We seek a few excellent people. We don't want a lot of dross. We don't want a lot of mediocre followers. What we want are people who are capable of action.
Do you see a lot of, do you see some elements of what you're talking about in other music that's...
I think the skinhead movement is a very positive step away from the decadence of the rock and drug culture that has dominated the youth so much. But as Adolf Hitler said, we seek to bring about a youth that has closed its heart to pity. All of the humanist values that Judeo-Christianity has encouraged, we want to wipe them out. It's led to democracy, social humanism, the idea of equality. All of this filth has to be wiped out if the human race is going to continue to take the next step in evolution.
What do you believe that would be like if you were in control, as far as your attitudes towards your own people?
Well, we are in control, because basically we are not a political organization, we are an occult organization. We're working behind the scenes to manipulate the way that people think. The war that we are waging is a guerrilla war on the human mind, and we use musical frequencies, the dominant frequency, which I've referred to before, and symbolism and imagery to awaken dormant aspects of the human mind.
Isn't it difficult to get club dates and things like that, obviously, once...
Well, we no longer are working in the context of that whole sphere of activities. We are moving into a much more elitist direction. We are only seeking individuals who are competent and who are willing to take action. There's a lot of people who will be an audience or a spectator, but we want people who will act.
And so the Abraxas Foundation's been for some time? Or?
The Abraxas Foundation is an organization that Boyd Rice and myself founded, and it's dedicated to bringing about the values which we consider true and determined by the natural order. And in our opinion, humanity has moved away from nature, and race mixing, genetic suicide, the destruction of the gene pool, all of that is completely inimical to the natural order. We need to return to order.
Is this, could this parallel somewhat Nietzscheism and Nietzsche?
Well, Nietzsche was certainly a forerunner of our thinking, because basically we're concerned with evolution, maintaining the very best of humanity and destroying weakness, destroying everything that Judeo-Christianity has succored and kept alive. We have no concern for the homeless, particularly. We don't have any concern in helping people. We're not seeking to convert people. As far as I'm concerned, in 1988, this is the cutting point. Either you're with us now, or you never will be with us.
What do you think about writers like, say, Oswald Spengler, writing A Decline of the West, the cycles of civilization?
I very much believe we are now in a cycle of order. The 60s, 20 years ago, represented a cycle of decay, and since my message is directly intended for young people, I would say it's about time that young people move away from the corrupt values of the 60s, the drug culture, race mixing, equality. The whole chaos of that period is ending, and we're going to see a new social movement in the 90s that will make Nazism and fascism look like kindergarten.
How is this going to happen? How are they going to arrest this tremendous power of the economic elite? Or do you intend on converting some of the economic elite?
We are moving into the mainstream. There are already people in the economic elite who share our philosophy and our beliefs. And I believe that our enemies are really paper tigers, to borrow a page from the communist doctrine. I believe that our enemies are no threat to us anymore. They're dead. They're dead weight. All that's required is for vital youth to rise up and separate. I very much believe in separation. We need to step away from the entire rotting edifice of our culture.
Was that just ideologically or physically?
Ideologically, and we're moving into the point where it must be done physically. And the main problem is the population explosion. There are too many people in the world for there to be any kind of quality at all. It's all designed for the lowest common denominator.
Well, isn't there a problem, though, that since 1972, about 92% of the abortions have been white
Well, of course,
viewed?
we are strictly concerned with the Western European tradition in every kind. We have no concern for any other. That's why we maintain a firm alternative to the African culture, the Asian culture that is dominating the Western world. Young people are caught up in a nightmare of racial confusion, and we seek to end that.
Do you think that this AIDS phenomenon...
I welcome the AIDS phenomenon.
I heard they're projecting 55 million people in the next 20 years dying throughout the world. The depopulation of Africa, could you foresee a recolonization of Africa after such an event, since it's primarily blacks?
Well, as Francis Parker Yockey stated, I believe the Western imperative is to seek an imperium. The Western man, the Faustian man, seeks to dominate the world. And we are losing right now. And people are waking up to that fact, that we can no longer let our culture and our entire history die out in the face of this dysgenic ocean of mud that has swept the world.
Don't you fear, in playing somewhat a little bit with the economic elite that may say they're converted, you getting a hold of...
Well, I don't like the word conversion. As I said, you're either with us or you're against us. We've drawn the lines. There's a battle raging right now. And it really doesn't matter whether the masses, that amorphous term, really understand what we're doing. We're moving ahead, and it really doesn't matter where they are.
Well, what I meant was where the elite economic would come in and try to manipulate you as a weapon for them.
Well, we're beyond that. That couldn't happen to us because we're not seeking any kind of... We're seeking a completely new world. We're removed completely from the traditions and cultural values of the old world. And we're moving into... We're creating the new man. It's an evolutionary movement.
The study of the wolf would show tremendous fierce independence and very loyal to his
Well, these are
kind.
values, of course, that have been completely forgotten by the sheep mentality, the herd mentality of present-day mankind.
And the wolf was quite, in most, I believe, monogamous in most cases, isn't the wolf?
Well, yes, absolutely. The wolf represents a wildness and yet a nobility and an independence that humanity has lost today.
And a territorialist, definitely.
Absolutely. As I say, we return to the natural order. Nature is the only law that we follow.
Is that in other words, we have to sit down and, instead of looking at nature as being inferior, look at nature as being, in many cases, superior?
I consider human to be an ugly word. I think most of humanity is debased and deformed and evolutionary unfit to continue. And I think we need, I wouldn't use a Rousseau-like philosophy, we don't need to return to anything, but if a new creature, a new man is to be born out of the ashes of this old one, we need to return to nature.
It's interesting that some of this seems to have points in Robert Audrey's works on territorial imperative.
African Genesis, the territorial imperative.
And the evolution of social contract is quite interesting. And it's sort of amusing to some people, but the structure of the baboon society is a very interesting study, which a lot of people...
Well, I think we can look all around us in the decaying metropolises of America and see what baboon society is like every day.
Do you see the rise of these gangs, so-called gangs?
All these are...
They're territorialists,
well,
they're gradually going to be political.
Here's what's happening as blacks are returning to their tribal roots, basically these gangs are nothing more than a return to the primitive tribal behavior that was appropriate in their African homeland, because that's their cultural level, and they will never rise above it. And white people, young white people, are also returning to their cultural roots.
Slower. Much slowly.
What's going on is a civil war. It is a civil war. It hasn't been declared yet, but there's a stratification process going on throughout the entire world, and the lines of battle are becoming drawn very clearly.
And the centers of that battleground appear to be the urban centers around the world.
Because the urban centers, just as in ancient Rome, are the cesspools of cultural degeneration right now.
Now, you have been involved with the publication of this book,
right.
The Manson File. Now, that would really raise the hair on a lot of people. And
well, these so-called revolutionaries in the movement who are afraid of something like Charles Manson, or who are afraid to look at his philosophy, reveal really how bourgeois they really are. They don't want to change that much. They're not that radical.
Well, what is in here about...
Well, if we look, it's a revisionist study of what Charles Manson was really all about, not what the media has told you it's all about. And certainly people in the movement should know that the media is the great liar, that everything in the media is a distortion. And certainly the work you're doing is an attempt to bring some truth and balance into the enemy camp, into the media. The Charles Manson created by the news and popular accounts of what happened has been turned into a popular bogeyman. But really, he was one of the few voices of reason in the 60s. What he tried to create was a white colony, a racial, ecological colony of people, which is very much akin to a national socialism.
Weren't they allowed into drugs and things like that, though?
Well, I think that was an unfortunate side effect of the social milieu which they were in, but I don't think it should be stressed or overemphasized. I think the most important thing about Manson and why he continues to be important, as I've said in my book, is that he's a sort of shaman or spiritual spokesman for the Western and white consciousness. In the same way that Adolf Hitler was in the 30s. I think Charles Manson fulfills that same role in our time.
Well, as Adolf Hitler evokes controversy over and over and over again to get into the Charles Manson situation, that is really controversy.
Well, as it says in my book, Charles Manson begins where George Lincoln Rockwell ends. His philosophy is a complete stepping away from the old ideas. And of course it frightens people, even in the so-called movement.
It's interesting that this book is not something you just find in a small bookstore someplace. It's on the big newsstand.
Well, as I say, we're moving into the mainstream. These ideas are too powerful to keep in any kind of underground context. And the truth will out. And it is coming out. It's about time. This cycle that we spoke of, this Spenglerian cycle, is revealing itself.
What do you is this like the Aquarian age, or what does that mean?
Well, I have no belief in astrology or anything like that, but it is a new age, as these idiots in the New Age call it, but it's not anything that they think. It's not a new age of crystals and herbal teas, but of blood and thunder. That's what we're going to see. It's a storm that's rising. And Charles Manson was simply a prophet of what's coming now. He sought to create a white and culturally sound value system in a period of chaos and disorder in the 60s, and that's what he should be remembered for.
Well, didn't he say something, though, about turning the blacks and the whites fighting each other? And then...
Well, that's the misconception that people like Vincent Bugliosi have fostered to try to make Manson seem like some kind of lunatic. But I think he's one of the most important radical philosophers of our time. People like James Mason of the Universal Order and Perry Wharton, who have been very much involved in the movement, have recognized Manson as a political thinker as well. And of course people on the right and the left have seen that. If you want to talk about the third position, Charles Manson has always represented that.
This puts you out way on the edge, whether it's leading edge, side edge, or behind edge, or what. And you know as well as I do.
Well, we're a vanguard.
You're not really, like you said, you're not out recruiting or like that. You have your own thing, and if people agree, they do it.
Mm-hmm.
But you know how hard it's going to be to so-called sell something like this.
Well, you'd
of course,
be surprised.
Nietzsche would have been the same way.
Exactly. Nietzsche was working 100 years ago in 1888. And we look at 1988 the same way that 1967 was called the Summer of Love. 1988 was the Summer of Hate. A lot of things were born this year that are going to dawn into the new phoenix of a new order. And Charles Manson, a new understanding of Charles Manson, is just the beginning of a massive revisionist project which we are undertaking.
Well, wasn't writers like Jack London similar to this?
Jack London very much stressed the wolf imagery and was a very lycanthropic person who respected nature and the brute force in man. His books like The Sea Wolf or Call of the Wild also conjured up the wolf, and he was very aware of Western European traditions. I would compare Jack London to Manson in a lot of ways. All of these people are working in the same spirit which we are working in.
We have today, our guest is Nikolas Schreck of Radio Werewolf, who has been with us before, and we're discussing the book, The Manson File, plus some new ideas coming forth from a significant group of people who are part of the movement, and We all have to get it together and talk it over. So what else is next?
Well, I think it's important that music be utilized as a tool for us, because that has been really the domain of the enemy for too long. It's been taken over completely by the absolute lunatic fringe of the left wing for years now. And if young people are only exposed to that kind of swill and degeneracy, then the next generation will also be a failure. We need to move them away from the drug culture, just the entire disgusting mess that young people are in right now. And they are waking up and moving away. The skinhead movement is the beginning. It's not the end of what's happening.
How will you batter your way into producing records and things like that? When that whole industry is
we have
no
concern in dealing with that industry. What all of us have to do, working in every field, is create their own products. We have to have a completely independent republic. Everything must be done independently.
Like a nation within a nation?
Absolutely.
Sort of borrowing a little bit on the Jewish situation, and how sort of a nation within a nation. Now, whites are beginning to realize that
well, we must maintain our own values. The industries of the world, whatever one you're talking about, from plumbing to music, we don't want anything to do with them. We've got to start our own empire. And to do that, we must stratify. We have to cut the ties completely with the old world.
Now, is this like tremendous amount of networking going on today?
Absolutely. There are people connected who, if people really were aware of the network that was going on, it would probably terrify them.
And the computers and all of the technology that's available.
Well, we're moving into 2000. We're moving into the future. And if we're going to claim the future and stamp our claws on the world to come, then we're going to have to utilize all of the technology at our disposal.
And so you will be moving into these...
the production of videos. Video Werewolf is one of the next projects which will be unleashed upon the world. And in every way, we've got to take over every field. We've got to return it to the natural order.
Doesn't it have to break down the national boundaries, too, to get...
There is no such thing as nations in the world
anymore. That's
anymore.
Economics, right?
There are no nations left. I mean, that's a romantic and sentimental idea that died. Maybe it died in 1945. Maybe it died earlier than that. But we don't need nations anymore.
So...
what we're doing is calling forth for those who understand our message and who feel it in their blood to join us in our struggle. And we're not looking for followers. We're looking for leaders to unite together, leaders of every stripe and every kind in our movement.
Does this go behind and get back into the whites in Eastern Europe and so forth, too?
Of course. We have
Russia?
We have many contacts in Eastern Europe and throughout the world who understand that there are no nations anymore. The only nation that matters is the one that we are forming, the werewolf nation, the werewolf of the nation of youth that's unleashed its full fury.
Do you perceive a time when there may be even pirate radio werewolf radio stations?
Well, Radio Werewolf, of course, was a pirate radio station in Nazi Germany. It was the last transmitting station in the Third Reich. And in a sense, it's beginning where it ended.
I see that in Britain, there was a ship with a radio station on playing rock and roll that the U.S. Coast Guard now has boarded and smashed their equipment.
This sort of thing...
Are we going to be having wars out there beyond the 200-mile limit or whatever?
I would encourage that. What we need is terrorist activity, cultural terrorist activity on every front. We've got to put our message out completely undiluted and pure.
You're talking about counterterrorism almost.
Absolutely.
Because the terrorism's against us.
The terrorism that's the most dangerous is the terrorism that the average American faces when he turns on the television or listens to the radio and hears this ocean of lies and disinformation and distortions pour out at him every day. And the work that you're doing is akin to what we're doing because it's putting out the truth. It's taking forbidden information and placing it into the hands of those who can use it and know what to do with it.
The youth are the ones who naturally are more rebellious, not...
They haven't been raised with the traditions of the older generations. They can see the chaos and decay in the world, and they are willing to move into a new world.
Well, then, are we moving towards a more or less a Mad Max society of the movie?
In the sense that it's an apocalyptic society. The end of the world already happened, and we're living in a posthumous age. to seek to build something in the ruins out of using corpses and the refuse of a dead age is foolish. We need to build completely new structures. We need to return to a heroic and larger-than-life lifestyle. Heroism has been forgotten in our culture. Nobility has been forgotten. And what Radio Werewolf ultimately represents is a banding together of leaders, of knights, of a new black order.
So economic determinism has really shot its wad.
Absolutely. Capitalism and communism are equal failures. We move even beyond the third position, although we respect it,
yes,
because we see a larger goal. We see a future that transcends anything that's even been conceived of before.
Well, it's good to have think tanks that are way out there on the edge, and no matter what anybody says about it. In fact, those are the people, as far as I'm concerned, that should be protected the most. The most radical, the most way out there, because what if they'd have suppressed Nietzsche? People like,
well, I can...
They tried, I'm sure.
I can predict that what's considered way out or radical now will be the mainstream in the age to come.
Obviously, because we can look back 20 years, and if anybody told us things would be like they are today, no one would believe it.
And so we must be aware of these occult cycles, these hidden cycles that go on, and move with them.
Nicholas, it's been great having you back on the show. Radio Werewolf, the Braxis Foundation. Been nice to see you again.
Always a pleasure.
Wish you good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you out there for watching Race and Reason and Free Speech.